Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. Today I'm with author and lawyer Stephen Harrison. He's an accomplished writer and tech lawyer, and his fiction and nonfiction pieces have appeared in the New York Times, The Washington Post, Wired, and Slate magazine. Over the past 5 years, he has penned the column Source Notes about Wikipedia and the world of facts on the internet, and he has a book that came out in August of this year, 2024. It is a thriller from Inkshares called The Editors, which I'm very excited to get my hands on. I enjoy thrillers, and I think this one's really interesting. So I would love if we could just start the episode with that, telling us about your book.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tammy. So The Editors is a suspense novel that's inspired by Wikipedia. And when I tell people that, they're kind of like, oh, how could that exist? But to me, I've always just thought that Wikipedia was sort of like a really fertile ground to write a suspense novel because it's so important for information and distributing information, right? Because when people Google a topic, Wikipedia is usually one of the first search results, and it informs our AI tools now. And if you ask Siri or Alexa, those answers are coming from Wikipedia. So I could see it as, critically important. And then also it's a little bit mysterious how it works behind the scenes. You have these volunteer editors who are contributing information and you don't know their motivations. I think a lot of them have very good motivations. They're just trying to get accurate information out there. But then there are others who have kind of a conflict of interest. They're trying to promote their country, maybe if there's an international dispute, or they're trying to promote whoever they're working for, if they're working for a for-profit corporation. Right. And so I really have four main characters in the novel. I have sort of the investigative journalist who's going under this or behind the scenes to learn more about what this internet encyclopedia, Infopendium, and what the different forces at play are. I have sort of a young up and coming Infopendium. It's called Infopendium in my novel, Infopendium editor, Alex, who's trying to kind of rise in the ranks and become an administrator of the site and one of the most powerful people on the project. Then you have an old timer. He's Ed Shelton, who has been contributing to the site for years and is just really concerned that the quality of the internet encyclopedia is degrading. And he's got his own views on that. And then I have Nevin, who's a for-profit editor who's working for wealthy people, think like influencers or corporate leaders, and just trying to make their pages better. And he eventually gets hired by the Chinese government to try to influence certain aspects of what appears on the Internet Encyclopedia. So I just thought it was a real ripe terrain for a suspense novel. And I'm really excited that readers have responded favorably to the book and they've enjoying the idea of a digital thriller.
That sounds really cool. We're in such a unique time in sort of technology history with AI coming up, for better or worse. I mean, nobody really knows what the future holds, but what are your thoughts on that and how might it affect the creative writing process for people?
Yeah, I've got a lot of mixed thoughts on AI. I think that, I kind of understand the people who take the position that they're not going to use AI, especially creative writers, because they feel like it is unfairly drawing on copyrighted materials from other authors, right? It's sort of this argument that it's copying or plagiarizing existing authors. I think that there's also, I would just say throughout history, there's kind of, whenever there's been a new technology, there's been a real pushback and say, oh, well, what about the costs of this? And I think that we do need to think about what the costs are. I read this piece and I don't recall it right offhand, but someone was saying, well, we need to allow for there could be a potentially great novel coming down the pipe that actually uses AI in a transformative or creative way. And it's not just plagiarizing other authors or their style. I think if this is a suspense novel and I wrote it before AI was a thing anyway, but let's say that I had just taken a chapter and said, rewrite it in the style of Michael Crichton. Well, and that, in my view, that would be plagiarizing. That's too much to use that style, right? Or lift the style of a former author. But, is there a way to use AI that is not plagiarizing or not copying. I don't know. I think that that's probably what the future is. And, I think that there probably will be some interesting, creative, transformative work down the line that uses AI in some way. And so I'm kind of in the middle, I would say. I don't believe in like an absolute prohibition, but I think that most use cases that I've seen so far are just like basically plagiarizing. So for now, I'm pretty much avoiding it.
Makes sense. Yeah. I feel like I'm one of the only people who's like basically not really used AI for any kind of anything. Like I've avoided it just because it kind of creeps me out, but I also like being my own person. I like having my own thoughts. And if something's difficult for me, I like sort of hashing it out myself or talking it over with friends, versus a robot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that, there's like so almost like, what do we mean by AI? Like if I replied to your email and I said, let's podcast on Saturday. And then Gmail prompted and said, do you mean Saturday, November 2nd? I'd be like, oh, that's like a convenient addition. Feel free, add that. Now, if Gmail tried to like rewrite my wording, I would get kind of upset because I like want to, I want to communicate in my own words. So maybe business communication is a little bit different than creative writing.
Yeah, that would make sense there. Mm-hmm. So you do a lot of tech writing. How has that influenced your not only writing style, but also creative process in getting your book, The Editors, completed? Like, did you find there were traits in writing those articles that fed well into what you were doing? Do you find, or do you think they were sort of two different worlds?
A little bit two different worlds in the sense that like right here where I'm speaking to you from is kind of my work desk. It's where I do my legal job. And it's also where I just tend to do a lot of my typing for like if I'm writing a piece for Slate or something like that, nonfiction journalism. I'm looking and the listeners won't be able to see me, but I'm looking over there and that's kind of my creative writing desk. That's a little closer to the window. And I just have it's a different place. And I do a lot more handwriting over there. I still bring my computer at times, but I think that I just have like a different style when I'm doing creative writing. So I have a little bit of a different approach to each of them. But I will say that the thing that helped me, because I was writing a pretty regular column for a while at Slate and, I was trying to get something out, every 2 weeks or, definitely once a month, but every 2 weeks is what I was shooting for, like an extended column. I think just being on deadline helps your creative writing. And that's something that I'm kind of going for. Working on my next book is like, just kind of pretend you're on deadline. Like you've got a chapter due every 2 weeks or something like that. I think that helps you kind of just stay making progress. Because otherwise, if something isn't on any sort of deadline, you can kind of just take forever with it. And that's not exactly helpful either.
That makes sense. And I like that you have your own sense of style. Like you have a different desk for one thing, a different desk for another. And even though a lot of the traits and the tenacity and the grit of having to write for anything really comes through, like you separate that and you're able to make them each their own and special for what they are. Because they're very, very different types of writing. Even though you're stringing sentences together, you're still going to have the same punctuation rules, but still very different types of writing and very different parts of your heart and your brain and soul go into that,
Oh, absolutely. I think that, and I think that there are different types. And I think that I'm often surprised by my fiction writing, but usually in my nonfiction writing, I'm just trying to see things as they actually are. So I think that usually it's just about clarifying, making it really clear to the reader. It's just a different mindset. It's reporting versus telling a story that hopefully the story surprises you too, because you want it to surprise the reader as well.
What is your least favorite part of having to write anything, whether it's your writing for the tech articles or your creative writing?
So I was working on revisions for my novel, The Editors, and I think that this was very good feedback. But in my original draft, when I submitted it to the publisher, I kind of did what I call the Game of Thrones approach. And what I mean by that is I had like 12 viewpoint characters, like how George R.R. Martin, has, you bounce around through a lot of different characters. And so I had all these different characters and I just realized, or they gave me the feedback that it would be a stronger story if you really focused on a few. And we decided on four main viewpoint characters that kind of all intersect at different points in the novel. It was the right approach, but I did feel like a sense of loss. I was like, oh, I've lost these like characters. I spent a lot of time thinking about their perspectives. And, I don't know, if the book came out, I think it's the best book that it could be or the best book that I could write at this phase of my career. but I still feel a sense of loss for for those stories. But I also think that, and for the most part, writing, if you've written something, that's going to stay with you, and I'm sure that those characters or those viewpoints and perspectives in other ways will come out in other stories that I write down the line. And so it's sort of like the conservation of energy. I feel like it's going to come out in some other way for something that I'm working on.
Yeah, I definitely think it will, especially if you have a strong attachment to a certain type of character and you find a way to weave. If you've cut them from one book, you may find a way to weave them into another one. Maybe there's a renaming or something, or there's a few tweaking, but then but the essence of that character will be there. And then you're like, oh, good. The world gets to know that person now,
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you've been feeling burned out, stressed, overwhelmed, or exhausted, the resources and courses at the Self-Care Institute are here to support you. The Self-Care Institute was founded by Dr. Ami Kunimura and provides support for individuals and organizations with burnout prevention, burnout recovery, and stress management. I've personally taken a few of these courses and found them to be super helpful, both professionally and personally. The care you give yourself matters just as much as the care you give to others. But if self-care is difficult for you, you're not alone. And the Self-Care Institute is here to support your well-being, resilience, and sense of fulfillment at work and at home. For more information, visit selfcareinstitute.com or go to the show notes and click on the link.
That's totally right. Yeah, I think I was hearing that about like Dickens, like he just like always has these like recurring types. And I was like, okay, I think that some part of his psychology wanted this to come out. Yeah. And I think it will come out, as you said.
Speaking of writers, who are some of your favorites that you've discovered recently?
Ooh, recently. So I'm again kind of looking at my writing desk over here, so I'm a little bit cheating. But so I would say that I have recently rediscovered Donna Tartt. And so I had read The Goldfinch a long time ago. So The Goldfinch was her kind of pretty recently famous one about I think it's Theo, who was painting, trying to protect this painting. And it's really interesting because it goes through Las Vegas and New York and all these different settings. But I had not read, and I am reading now, The Secret History, which is kind of her dark academia novel. And I think it's really good. I think for the next piece that I'm working on, or next novel, I'm using first person. And so I'm just really noticing her use of the first person and then unreliable narrator or partially reliable narrator. And I just think it's so good. I think it's really well done. So I'm all about her lately.
Nice. Yeah, I remember starting The Goldfinch ages ago, but I have not yet finished it. So that's reminded me to put that back on my list.
Yeah. Well, and they're both good in different ways, but I'm really enjoying The Secret History. And so if you haven't read that one, I might recommend that even more.
Who's an author that you come back to time and time again?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Lev Grossman, who wrote the Magicians series. So I actually haven't written any fantasy. Like I don't even view that as the genre that really is the one that's coming out for me to write, at least not right now. But I just have very vivid memories of certain scenes in the Magicians series. Like, are you familiar with that series? It's kind of like a grown-up. It's described as a grown-up Harry Potter, but it's like they're in college and they made a sci-fi TV series about it. What I like about it is, like, let's say I really want a scene involving food. I might just remember like the banquet scene and that, and like I'll just see, like how did he do it? How did he kind of bring in those details? And when I write is going to be very different because I'm not writing about students at a wizard college, but the way that he, created that description like is something that I might use. And so I'd say Lev Grossman is the author that I keep coming back to right now. He also recently had an Arthurian book come out, but I haven't read it just yet.
Nice. Are you ever inspired by, like music or art or anything else that sort of seeps into your writing?
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit easier for me to have writing inspire writing. I think that sometimes I will pull up and see, I'm struggling to describe a restaurant in Chicago. And I've been to Chicago, but I haven't thought about it in like a literary way before, let's say, just sort of a recent example. But so I might pull up a newspaper column of a really good restaurant being described by a food critic in Chicago, right? And just see what kind of details they're picking up on. So it's research in a way, but it's also just trying to get a sense of place, right? I'm looking over here. I've got some good travel books that I use for that. There's like this monocle travel series. So it's not like I'm getting from fiction to fiction. I'm kind of looking at some nonfiction travel journalism, and it might help my writing. I do sometimes make a playlist and I made a playlist for the editors of and it was really just one character, Alex, like music that he would like, because he's a pretty intense personality, right? He's the one who wants to become like chief administrator or one of the top administrators on the Wikipedia comparison site, Infopendium. And, so he's listening to like Stravinsky. He had some EDM music that he liked. And what's funny is I didn't really use a lot of that for the novel, but I used it sometimes when I was writing Alex chapters to like get in that headspace of the intensity. And so I do use music a lot, and I'd be curious to know how this works for you. I can't really listen to music while I'm writing, especially with lyrics, or else I just start typing the lyrics out. So it's usually a pre-writing thing for me and not during writing that I'm listening to music.
That's interesting. I think that whatever works for a person's creative process is exactly what they should do for themselves. For me, I create playlists based on each of my books. I mean, none of my things are published. I just write because I enjoy it. And it varies from something that would set the ambiance, or, even regarding like a time period, something that would like what you did, picking music that a character would like. So sort of, or even just something that is a mood, a song that captures a mood between in a scene or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
And I don't mind listening to it during, but I do end up typing a little bit slower when I do that.
That might be your brain processing at two different levels or something like that. That could be why.
Yeah. What do you enjoy doing when you're not being a lawyer and a writer?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got great friends and I love travel. And actually, I think that one reason that I am reluctant to leave law and just focus on writing full time is because, first of all, there's the economic element of it. And I feel like I would maybe be unable to travel as much, but we'll see. We'll see what the future holds as far as that. I do like, going with friends, and, I think that to meals and stuff like that. I don't know. I think relationships, friendships make life worth living. And so that's where I get a lot of value.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm like that too. I'm one of those, like, I value experiences and friendships over like going and buying something, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's slightly generational, and no knock on my parents or anybody of that age, but they just have so much stuff and they're always trying to pass it down. And I was like, I don't want your stuff. It's kind of like, but whereas I probably splurge and spend too much on those experience type things, right? And maybe you don't need to spend money to have a great experience. In fact, usually that's the case, that you don't.
Yeah. I'm going to flip the switch here. And so you talked about travel. Where is a place that you loved going, and where is a place that you can't wait to go next?
Oh, wow. So I did a study abroad program in the UK. I was in Oxford when I was an undergrad, and that was just like a magical, amazing experience for me because, I felt like a true Oxford student. I was taking tutorials and I was taking classes in Dickens and C.S. Lewis and 19th century novels and Shakespeare. I just really wanted to focus on British authors. And I hadn't traveled that many places before. It was the first time I felt like it was a truly different country. And Oxford has this not dark academia, or at least it didn't feel like dark academia to me. It was like the city of dreaming spires with the history and the culture and everything. So I've been thinking about that a lot with my writing, because I think that phase of life really did inspire my literary interest and my desire to kind of keep pursuing this, right? Publication. I've been to a lot of places in Europe, but I've still never gone to Paris. And I recently read for the first time, The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway, which starts in Paris. And I was thinking about the salon culture and coffee shops and Paris at the turn of the century, right? When all the lost generation authors were there, or I guess the interwar period is what I should say. And so I'm kind of dying to go to Paris. That movie Midnight in Paris doesn't satisfy my desire to go there. I want to go there in person. And so at some point I'd like to go.
Nice. Yeah, no, Hemingway, brilliant. I've read bits and pieces, but not actually a complete novel of his. It's also on my to-do list. But Midnight in Paris, loved that movie. I'm a fan of Woody Allen's work, not necessarily him as a person, but his work is stunning.
Same. And you might try, because it's kind of funny because I had read around Hemingway a lot. And I read his short story, The Pearl, and I read The Old Man and the Sea, but I hadn't read this is like his debut and like probably the one that's considered like a masterpiece, really. The Sun Also Rises. And it's pretty much about them drinking and partying and in Paris and Spain at the bullfight. But the reason it's serious is because, they have a lot of the wartime baggage and injuries that are kind of haunting them. And so I think it's just so well done. I'm interested in thinking about how some of those same concepts can apply to like us now, like, younger generations, because I think that we also maybe similarly have some trauma, although it's not wartime trauma or not. Like I'm interested in like, sort of responding or echoing some aspects of Hemingway in a future work.
Yeah, I think that'd be really cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Just got to come up with the title. The Sun Still Rises, something like that. Yeah. Or something completely different. That's probably better.
He really did have a way with titles.
Great titles. Yeah. For Whom the Bell Tolls is so serious and, great. The Old Man and the Sea is just so simple, but it's mythic. Like that's a mythic title for a book. Great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. That is one I did read, The Old Man and the Sea.
Yeah.
All the way through, but like so long ago.
Yeah. Well, I always feel like guilty that I haven't read enough. But the thing is, there's so much good work, and there's always getting more being produced. So you kind of just need to pick your influences and pick the ones that you think speak to you and come to you at a certain point of time. There's like a serendipity when a book comes to you.
Yes. I feel that too. It's almost like the book chose you. It fell off from the shelf at the bookstore,
It really does feel that way, right? And I think it's because there's, and do you abandon books very much? I do sometimes. I'm like, this one isn't right for me. And usually when I abandon it, it's because I know what I need to read next is that other book that I should be going for anyway. So
yeah, I have on occasion abandoned books like forever, and it really takes a lot for me to do that. Because I tried to give them the good old college try and get through the first several chapters because, sometimes you just have to get into something. But there was a very, very best-selling novel that I picked up and I took with me on a trip not too long ago. I was surprised because I liked quotes from this book that I'd seen all over Instagram and things like that. And so I thought, oh, well, surely I'm going to like it because it sold a bajillion copies. I couldn't get into it. It was almost like preachery in a way. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to name the book because, I don't want to like bring them down at all because I know that there's value in it for other people, but where I am in life, it didn't speak to me at all,
Was it fiction or nonfiction? I know you're not going to name it, but the fiction or nonfiction?
It was fiction, but sort of like almost self-helpy wrapped up in a fictional story. Mm-hmm. And I was disappointed. I was like, oh man, I was so ready to be engrossed in this thing where I was just captivated and inspired by quotes that I'd seen from it. And then I get into the meat and potatoes and I'm like, oh no, I can't handle it. Like I couldn't stand it. I couldn't.
Right. That helps you. That's good to know. I mean, and your books aren't meant for everybody, right? If you write a book for everybody, I forget who said this, maybe Vonnegut, he said that you're like opening it up to pneumonia and, but yeah, there's certain books that are not for me and they're for someone else. And so I have the same reaction to you. Do you listen to many audiobooks or every once in a while?
I don't. I feel like that would be a really good thing I would enjoy, but I'm just not bothered to get into it,
Audiobooks are on my mind. The audiobook for The Editors comes out later this month and it's got different voices. It's got a male voice and a female voice. So like that's sort of new for me, although I understand it's like more common in romance books, but I listen to more nonfiction books. I haven't done as many fiction books on audio. Of course, I'll be listening to The Editors on audio and I'm excited about the new format, but just kind of polling people on what their audiobook tastes are.
Yeah. I love the concept. And once I actually get into it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is fabulous because, I love listening to people read. And, growing up, my parents would always read aloud, or we'd listen to audiobooks and like read together while the audiobook was going, so it's just as an adult, it's one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, an audiobook. Cause I'm so tactile and so visual. So I'm like, I have to go find the actual thing because you can't touch an audiobook. And I like to hold the novels,
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that what's helped me a little bit with audio. So whenever I read, and when I typically read, I prefer print and I write in the margins, right? But when I do an audiobook, I'm like, I have to do something. So I open up my notes app and I'm taking notes of like an interesting quote or something because I don't like, it has to feel participatory to me. So, I mean, if you need to, there's a way to kind of hack that physical into the audiobook, you bring a little notebook around and you're scribbling or something. But I think that there might be a different way, but in general, I kind of have the same impression as you that it's a little bit weird to quote unquote buy an audiobook, which are really just licensing that you never get to touch, right? Physically. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So, serious question.
Sure.
Did you have any barriers internally or externally to reaching this point in your life that you feel comfortable sharing with the audience?
Yes, I didn't know what I wanted to do after college, although I think that I had some inkling that I wanted to write. And I think I sort of hurriedly put together a portfolio for MFA and creative writing programs. This was also like right in the middle of the recession. And there was a part of me that was like, I just need to wait this out in grad school or something like that. Right. And I think that, so I, with that rush, I didn't get into any MFA programs, and the programs that I wanted were the ones where they would like fund you, right, for 2 years for your writing. And I just had this sort of ideal landscape to it. And I think that kind of bothered me for a few years. I mean, I was disappointed, right? And a little bit, I thought I took it as a little bit of a judgment or an evaluation of my writing ability. And then I had I had kind of a mindset shift where I was just like, I'm just going to be like an appreciator, like admire good art and good writing. And I did it, but it was very slow. Like I was reading things on the side, right? And I wasn't really producing very much. And, I'm 37 now. I've got kind of a quote. I forget how I came up with it or who said it first. And I'm just paraphrasing it, but it's sort of like, no one takes you seriously until you're 30. It's not really true, but it's been a little bit true in my life. Right. And right around 28, 29, like right on the edge coming up to 30 is when I started to say, well, I'm just going to submit this to like an op-ed to like the New York Times or a think piece to Slate or whatever. And finally things just started to land. Right. And so I think that like that period, that sort of dark period of when I was just like not really writing that much, but I was just reading a fair amount, reading more. I'd say like reading with greater attention to things. It kind of helped me. And I think that while I'm still a little jealous of the people who did the MFA and got that like dedicated period, in a way, I kind of, while doing my legal career, I kind of gave myself an MFA in the sense that I like read a lot of things. And, the internet, what we're doing right now is these kind of good quality conversations are like a great way to connect and like, meet people and like exchange good ideas and so that's why I think that you can get a real education that way. So I'd say the barrier is I thought I had to go this sort of academic route to publishing and writing. And for me, at least, I'm kind of glad it shook out the way it did because I think it made me a different writer. And of course, now I can draw a little bit on my work experience in my writing in a way that, so often MFA program writers, they end up writing about creative writing MFA programs at a university. It's like the world that they know, right? It's what comes into their experience, right? Or their experience is what comes into their writing. And so I think that I probably have a little bit more producing more interesting writing because of my experiences. Although I would say for a long time, I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder about the MFA rejections.
It sounds like, you've been able to grow past that and you've been able to find your niche and what makes you happy. So that's the important part.
Yeah, sure. I think that, but then the tricky thing is that you're sort of only as good as your last book or your last work. And right. And so I think, what you do or what I would say the psychology of it is I was just like, oh, like I got this freelance piece in the New York Times. Maybe I got paid a few $100s for it, but that's a really good byline or whatever. And like, I am set for life. Like, that's why I'm thinking. It's just like, no, you're not, right? You kind of just still have to keep hustling, right? And, by the way, you're also writing this at a time when people's like trust in the media is like not as high as it used to be. And like, all these traditional landmarks. I've got a friend who talks to me about this too. He like worked really hard to become a well-known journalist, and he got the blue check on Twitter. And then like the next year, Elon Musk bought Twitter. It's now X. The blue check wasn't something that you earned. It was like something that you bought by paying $10 a month. And it was like, okay, well, so I think in life, like, and so it's sort of the thing that he was really going for. His goal isn't, in his case, isn't something that he wants anymore, right? And I was just like, that's just life, right? Like you got to be really careful about these externals, because they might not give you the validation that you need long term. And to keep going for the long term, you really need like an internal fire, because that's just going to last a lot more than like these sort of external markers of prestige.
Yeah, and that's always a great thing to remember is, not that we can't set external goals, but, really thinking about what do we want for ourselves and the internal and the long term, because it's so important to keep that creative fire going, especially when things like that happen, when we don't get the validation that we seek, when we're blindsided by something, when we come across those stumbling blocks in our creative process,
Sure. Yeah. And for me, it's a tricky balance, because I don't want to say that I just write for myself, because I do want to like make an influence on readers, or maybe give them a transformative experience. Maybe in, the case of the editors, it's like they think about internet information in a different way. It's like, or there's, it's a suspense novel. I think it's like entertaining in some way, right? So I am thinking about other people, right? But it's not like, if the metrics, if I'm having that effect on a few people and it's really, really good connection, then I'm going to be happy, even if it's not like a mega hit bestseller. Of course I want it to be a bestseller anyway. If I wouldn't be honest, if I said I didn't, care about sales at all, but it can't be the main focus, or else you'll go crazy. Right.
Yeah. So, fun question. If you could be any fictional character for a day, who would you be?
Oh, great question. Let me think just 1 second. I have been reading some Michael Connelly lately, and he's got this character, Harry Bosch, who's a little bit more hard-boiled. He's like a private investigator character. And what I like about it is Michael Connelly, in the indirect third-person style he has, you can kind of hear Harry Bosch's thoughts. It's just like very matter of fact. He's not very long-winded, but then he also can just pretty quickly, get to the scene, evaluate things, tough, resilience. I think we used that word resilience earlier. And, I think that he's been through some hard stuff. I mean, there are 30 books, I want to say, in Michael Crichton's series, but he, and actually to make it even more interesting, his brother or his half brother is the Lincoln Lawyer, which is another series. So I think I'd like to be like a tough, hard-boiled detective for a day and, just solve a really interesting crime.
That would be neat.
Uh-huh.
What, if you had like intro music or a theme song to your life, what do you think it would be?
Oh, I love this question. So I have lately really been into The Planets by Holst. So Gustav Holst was like a classical composer. And there's that piece in, how would you say it? I guess Segments is Jupiter, which is like the planet of joviality. It kind of represents Zeus, Jupiter, the Roman god, and Zeus, and there's that middle where like he takes like an old folk song. It might be easier for the listeners if they could just pull it up on YouTube and listen to it. But I would love if my theme song was that kind of like that steady, but also like kind of joyous aspect of Holds the Planets. And I think out of all the planets, my favorite is Jupiter. I like that Jupiter energy.
Nice.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that is such a unique suite of works, The Planets.
Yes.
And I'm still a planet Pluto person. Like in my heart, Pluto will always be a planet.
Yeah, sure. And the music, I think there's, do they have Pluto? They have, yeah, he I think he has all of them. Yeah, I know I can hear Neptune. And or maybe it ends with Neptune. Anyway, we'll have to look at that afterwards. With the,
yeah, I'll have to check. I haven't listened in a while, but just in general,
yeah,
I'm like, oh, poor Pluto.
Right. Yeah. When we were growing up, or certainly when I was growing up, Pluto was a planet, considered a planet. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm just curious, what is something you wish you'd known when you first started? And it could be applicable to your legal life, your writing life, either or.
Yeah, I think that in my writing life, I had this idea when I was writing that I would notice something that was wrong and I'd be like, well, it's not that bad. I think I was kind of giving myself like a completion grade. And, really writing, you're trying to make it the best you can for the reader, right? And so I would say is what I wish I'd do is like when I notice something is wrong now, I don't bury it in the sense of like, I also trust my evaluation that something's wrong or it's not quite working. And either, I'm looking again over at my writing desk, I either mark in the margins that this is something I need to come back to, or sometimes I pause and say, this is important enough that I need to fix it, right now and get it on the right track. And so I think that listening to that inner voice, because it's people are very different. Some people have a very, very strong internal critic. And if they listen to it at all, that like it paralyzes them and that they never can write. I'd say that I have a strong critic, but not in the initial draft. And I need to kind of listen to my voice when I hear something's wrong so that I at least mark it and fix it later on. So, I mean, that might be a little bit in the weeds, but that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it now is that I need to like listen to, because I'm not going to like pull a fast one on anybody. I'm not going to be like, get something that's not the best it could be and then have the readers like trick the readers into thinking it's good. It's like, no, actually, if you think the dialogue's bad here or whatever, you should acknowledge that and either make a note to fix it later or fix it right then, right? Don't turn in anything that's incomplete in part. And the reason I think that you can get into that trap with a novel is because the novel's so long that you can say, oh, I'm good here. So why can't I be a little bit boring or dull or flat dialogue here? But you need to make it the best you can throughout, right? You owe it to the readers because it's a huge investment of their time, right? To read a novel or to listen to a novel. And so I think that having that respect for your reader immediately is something that I've kind of had to teach myself.
That's great. And I love that you're open to that, open to being your best self, open to always improving, because not only is it, like you said, you owe it to yourself and respect for yourself and your writing and your ability, but also to the readers, because it does take a long time. And in this busy day and age, there's a lot going on. When someone decides to pick up a book and invest their time in it, it's got to be worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You want to put your best self out there. And I just can't write that fast. So I'd rather make it really good each time a novel comes out, as opposed to really churning through them.
One final question.
Sure.
And would you like a serious one or a fun one?
Oh my goodness. Can I ask whatever your heart's drawing to you to? Either the hard one or the fun one works for me.
Okay. I'm very curious about where your mind will go with this serious one, actually.
Okay, sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this is one that I will often ask, but in your own words, what does living a creative life mean to you?
Good question. I think that a creative life means this sort of state of like openness. You're open to true reporting, because even fiction, even if it's a made up story, it needs to feel very true, right? True to the characters, true to the setting. I think that a fiction writer and you're trying to be good at it, when you're listening to like a group of your friends converse, you're going to be open to all their different perspectives and you're going to start seeing things from their perspectives. It's like kind of the radical empathy or whatever that you're getting them with. And then I also, that word openness is what I keep drawing on, because I think that one, and you asked about this before, one difference between nonfiction writing is it's a little bit more of a push energy with nonfiction. You've got this kind of idea or an argument and you're, let's say nonfiction opinion piece. You're putting out an argument and you're bolstering it with all these facts and evidence, and you're pushing. That's the way I think of it, as like a push energy. And when I'm sitting at the creative writing desk, or when I'm working on a more creative project, either a novel or a short story, I feel it as like a pull energy. Like you're almost like pulling something from the universe. You're kind of just at the desk and seeing what comes out through your hand. And so I think that in order to write something with a pull energy, you need to be very open to what the universe universe or your subconscious or whatever is suggesting. So to me, living a creative life really does come down to that trait of openness. And I think what makes it really hard for people is you can't just be radically open all the time, or at least I can't. I feel like I would just be like a live wire, like very vulnerable and kind of, not living a healthy, balanced life if I did that. But especially for me, it's the mornings. For other people, they're going to have another time period. But like that morning period, you need to be like really open and kind of get into that state in order that you can, write your best work.
Excellent. Stephen, thank you so much for joining the show. Is there anything else you'd like to tell our listeners before we go?
Well, yeah, we just talked about the editors. The book is available wherever you buy books, whether you can get it from your indie bookstore or you can get it from a giant like Amazon. And I'm very excited about the audiobook coming out November 26th. And if you'd like any more information about me as a writer, you can check me out. My website is stephenharrison.com, and I'm Stephen with a PH.
Excellent, Stephen. Thank you so much. All your info will be in the show notes for listeners. Thanks. And as always, keep listening.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.